If you want to turn in your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 18, we are going to look at what is probably a familiar story to you. This will be the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. Really classic story to talk about in Sunday schools, and oftentimes, some of those old stories that we learn about as kids, we find that as we turn into adults, we haven't been there in a while. Sometimes we sort of are so familiar with something that we fail to go back and appreciate the truths that God is teaching us there. And so we will return to this passage. We'll be looking at verses 20 through 40 tonight. And we're going to dig in a little bit more deeply into what's happening. A couple of main ideas that come out in the text. The first is the quality of our worship of God and the expectation that God sets for us to believe in him. And this is centered on the idea that's presented first in Moses' book of the law in Deuteronomy, and it continues to be a primary theme throughout all of Scriptures, that the worship of God is only possible when we worship him alone. There can be no additives to our worship. There can be no alternatives. God, Lord of creation, eternal, all-powerful, deserves everything that we have, our whole heart. And so we'll see that theme in the passage tonight. We'll also take a look at some of the temptations of idolatry. We'll look at the idolatry that the Israelites had, what they expected to gain out of their idolatry. And then we'll talk briefly about some of the challenges that we have with idolatry today, what that looks like in the modern world. Then we will take a look at the proof, the evidence that God gives that he is who he says he is. Oftentimes, Christianity is pointed at as having a blind faith. But we'll see that God has provided abundant evidence for his dominion. And then finally, we'll take a look at the faithful and effective prayer of Elijah as we get to the end of the story tonight. So in this passage in 1 Kings chapter 18, we're roughly entering the timeline at about 874 BC. This is roughly 60 years after the kingdom has divided under Rehoboam, Solomon's son. And so the 10 tribes that have separated from the tribe of Judah, they have split off. They have formed their own nation, which is referred to as Israel. And this nation, this 10-tribe coalition, immediately falls into idolatry. So under the first king of the northern tribes, Jeroboam, they build these golden calves, and they place them in the north and in the south of the kingdom. And Jeroboam does this explicitly to lead the people away from worship of God. Jeroboam says he is concerned that the people will continue to go down and worship God at Jerusalem. And so he provides these idols as distractions, as things to draw the people literally away from the center of worship which God had established and where he had placed his name. Jeroboam's children continue to perpetuate the idolatry. They add additional Canaanite deities to the mix, the Asherah and the Baals. They continue to lead Israel away from the covenant promises that God had made to them and that they had committed to. And as we go through these 60 years leading up to Ahab, we see that the nation begins to suffer the consequences of covenant disobedience. Those covenant consequences are outlined 2 specific chapters in the Old Testament that you can bookmark as a baseline for understanding some of the judgments that's brought on Israel. Leviticus chapter 26 and Deuteronomy chapter 28. These outline the covenant promises, the blessings that will come upon Israel if they obey, if they worship God, if they seek him. And then the curses that shall come upon the nation if they disobey. The curses continue to increase in magnitude and scope as the Israelites continue to persist in disobedience. These curses are designed to take Israel and turn them from their path of disobedience and to drive them back to the Lord. One of these curses is drought. And we'll see that play a key role in the story today. By the time we get to Ahab's lifetime in 874 BC, the comfortable situation in Israel has deteriorated. So under David, he conquers many of the nations to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. His son Solomon has peace during his reign. But by the time of Ahab, we see that in the south, the Egyptians have again risen to power. In fact, previous to Ahab's lifetime, the Egyptians have overrun the kingdom of Judah to the south. They've taken tribute from them, and they continuously are threatening incursions into the land of Israel. To the north and to the east, we see the Syrians in Damascus begin to rise in power as well. And they will be perpetual enemies of Israel throughout this time period. And so the pressures on Ahab's kingdom are great. In an attempt to deal with these external pressures, Ahab's father Omri, king of Israel before him, makes a marriage alliance with the Phoenicians, the Tyrians and the Sidonians. So he goes and he gets a princess from the Sidonians and he brings them and he marries this princess to his son, to Ahab, and her name is Jezebel. And she continues to perpetuate the idolatry of her homeland in Israel. Ahab goes along with this. During Ahab's lifetime, we're told in 1 Kings 16 and 17, he builds a temple to Baal in the capital city of Israel. It's called Samaria. He builds a temple there in the midst of the city. He leads the people in idolatrous worship. And then he begins to expand this as the national religion. As a result, the Lord issues a covenant curse on Israel. He sends the prophet Elijah to Ahab to proclaim a drought. From the New Testament, Jesus tells us that this drought lasted 3.5 years. Some of us may be experiencing what a week of drought looks like in our gardens today. The plants have grown brittle and need constant watering. You can imagine then what 3 years without rain would look like. As we look at the geography of Israel, it becomes even more evident what the problem is. So Israel, where it sits, will frequently get seasonal rains that blow from the west on the Mediterranean, and they carry these rain clouds up into the land of Israel. Israel is steep and hilly. The location of Jerusalem is almost 2,000 feet above sea level. And so when the rain falls, it doesn't pool up in lakes or reservoirs, but it runs down through the valleys, these steep ravines, and it makes its way back to the sea or down to the Jordan Rift. In Israel, historically, the rains come in 3 different periods. So there's the fall rains, which are known as the early rains. The primary winter season, November and December, have pretty steady rainfall. And then there's the late rains, which occur between February and March. These rains, year by year, are necessary for Israel to be able to grow crops. And so the withdrawal of these rains makes it difficult, if not impossible, to sustain any agricultural practices. And so over these years of drought, the nation itself begins to suffer greatly. Within the first year of the drought, it's likely that most of the stores of food would run out. All but the wealthy would be scrounging for scraps of food. We know from a similar incident in Genesis with Joseph that in these times where food became scarce, the wealthy would actually take advantage of the poor people. We see Joseph in Genesis during the 7 years of famine. First, the people bring all the money that they have to purchase food. Then they sell their land to Pharaoh. And finally, they sell themselves even into bondage. And so it's likely the commoners here were suffering greatly by the 3rd year of this famine. Earlier on in the chapter, before the section that we'll read, we also find out that Ahab is not particularly concerned with his people in the famine. He takes his servant Obadiah at the end of these 3 years, and he says, we're going to go throughout the land searching for springs of water that the horses may eat, that we may not lose too many of the horses. He was more concerned about his military power than he was about the state of his people which he was governing. During this time, Jezebel and Ahab also strike out against the prophets of the Lord. We know that they kill as many of the prophets as they can get their hands on. Obadiah, it says, hides 100 in caves during this rampage. Elijah himself, the Lord sends to a far land. He lives with a widow where God miraculously provides food for him during these 3 years of famine. And the nation as a whole is literally brought to its knees by this drought. We might imagine if the people were expecting that it just was coincidence this drought had happened, 1 year would not be enough to satisfy that. Oh, that's just happenstance, right? And by the time 2 years rolled around, it'd be harder and harder to deny, right? And by the third year, in the desperate plight, the people are ready for a resolution. And it's at this time, at the end of 3 years, that the Lord instructs Elijah to return to the land of Israel. The Lord here at the end of these 3.5 years of drought is going to confront Israel's idolatrous nature. He's going to demonstrate finally to the people that he alone is God. And this is where we pick up the passage in 1 Kings 18. The nation at its knees, desperate. And this question that we'll kick off the text with, that Elijah is going to present to the people. Who are you going to worship? Starting in verse 20. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces and lay it on wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire under it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, it is well spoken. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many. And call upon the name of your God, but put no fire under it. And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is God. Either he is musing, or he's relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. And he put the wood in order, and cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all of these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then fire from the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And Elijah said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal, let none of them escape. And they seized them. And Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. So there's a lot to unpack here. I promise we won't go through every single detail, but we're going to dig in as much as we can in the time that we have here. Ahab, it says, sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets of Baal together at Mount Carmel. So this would take some time. Mount Carmel is located on a small spur that sticks out into the Mediterranean on the coast of Israel. The mountain range is about 13 miles long, and it borders directly upon this large flat area called the Valley of Jezreel. Ahab's palace, in fact, lies at the southern tip of this valley, and it provides a perfect location for this confrontation to go down. God sets the stage perfectly. Right. Elijah and the prophets will be up on the side of this mountain. The people of Israel will gather into the valley, and they'll have this magnificent view of what's about to happen. Almost as if they're in an amphitheater around the mountain. It would take some time. Israel would come from the distant corners of the nation to view what was about to happen. And when the people are gathered there, Elijah comes to them and he makes this statement. Look at it with me in verse 21. He says, How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. Elijah is calling back to the covenant that Israel has made with God many years ago at another mountain in the Sinai. And there, in that covenant, God had clearly demonstrated his ability to deliver Israel. He had led them up out of the land of Egypt. He had defeated the armies of the Egyptians. And there, at the foot of Sinai, he made his law with them. This covenant that was established required, based on the evidence that God furnished, that Israel worship him and him alone. The first of the commandments is, You shall have no other God beside me. Jesus identifies the most important aspect of the law, that you shall worship God and God alone. None other shall you serve. This commandment is built upon by the second, which says, You shall build no idols. And so Elijah here is challenging them. And he gives them the option to consider here what God has done. If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. Elijah is saying, Has God not provided enough evidence? Have you not seen his faithfulness? Has he not demonstrated here, even by the word that he gave me 3 years ago, that rain would be withheld? Isaiah, another prophet, some years later will say in Isaiah 42:8, the Lord is God and he does not share his glory with any others. Right? Today, this remains the key principle of faith. You cannot have any additions to your faith in God that distract us from committing wholeheartedly to him. But this is frequently what we do, is it not? Oftentimes, we end up coming to God as the last option. One of the things that I heard that was really profound, but kind of talks to this issue that we have, especially in our modern life, I was talking with someone during a small group study a number of years ago before we had come to Crosspoint, and he said, "Well, what's your view of God? How do you look at God day to day?" And they said, "Well, God I see as more of a safety net. I try to live my life in a good way, and when all else fails or when I kind of run out of options, then he's the fallback plan." Right. And that's frequently how we view God. We put him at the end of the line, right? We rely on ourselves to be able to solve the problems that we face, right? And it's only when things go horribly wrong that we turn to the last-ditch effort, the Hail Mary. Right? God is saying here, and Elijah is saying, this is not the method by which we serve the God of the universe. He does not share his glory with others, and he demands our wholehearted allegiance to him. As we begin to place other things before God, we begin to realize that those things are becoming idols. Today, we might be shocked to see how many people still worship carved images. We kind of don't have that view in the Western world, but many nations, many religions still use literal carved images as the center of their worship. In the Western world, we still pursue idolatry, and I would suggest that the quickest way to see one of these idols would simply be to find a mirror. Right. Whether it's the power that we have at work, the money that we earn, the self-image that we cultivate, whether through health or our abilities to do things. Oftentimes in the Western world, the idols are close to home. Oftentimes, these are the things that we base how we live our lives on. And the moment that these things are challenged, we find ourselves in desperate straits. Oftentimes, we throw money at a problem to try to fix it. Or we think, if only I can find a doctor who can help me. Maybe I just need to find some friends who will do a better job of encouraging me, right? When we begin to examine these things in light of how they affect our worship of God, we recognize that these things have taken the place of idols in our heart, that we attribute more power to those things than we attribute to God. And this brings us back to Elijah's question. If God really is, if the Lord really is who he says he is, if he's really done what he says he's done, then we need to worship him as God, wholeheartedly, as he demands. And if he's not, then these other things we can worship. We will find out rather quickly that this is a rhetorical question. And God is going to demonstrate clearly and permanently here that he is in fact God, and that these other things that the people have placed their faith in are figments of their imagination. Elijah outlines a test for the people. Right? He says, I alone am left, a prophet of the Lord, but there's 450 prophets of Baal. And so we'll have this confrontation. We'll let Baal and God contest against one another, and the winner of this contest, he is going to be God. Right? The contest is to let these bulls be given and a sacrifice be made. So they're going to prepare an offering, a bull. They're going to put it on a pile of wood, and then they're going to call out to God. And whichever God answers by fire, sets the wood ablaze, and consumes the offering, he is God. Now, if we didn't know much more about the story, we would say, wow, this seems like a bit of a risk for Elijah, right? The people say what when Elijah proposes this test? What do the people say? It's well spoken. Right? They say, this seems like a good test. Right? And we say, is it really a good test? Right? If we think about it, God has already proven himself this way to the nation of Israel before, a number of times. He showed up on Sinai in fire. He showed up in a burning bush to Moses, right? When they consecrated Aaron and his sons as priests over the nation, God lit the altar on fire when they offered the sacrifice of consecration. Elijah is simply returning to the covenant roots that Israel has already seen and already established with God. Meanwhile, Baal, we consider him, he is a figment of the imagination of sinful people. If we dig into the archaeological record a little bit and we look at how they worshipped Baal and who Baal was, they attributed to Baal power over fire, over the storm, over lightning. Baal would go in this cycle year by year, is how the Canaanites worshipped him. In the fall, he would come and he would procreate with Asherah. And it was through this act of procreation that the earth would be watered. Then Baal would suffer at the hands of the god of death in the Canaanite pantheon, Mot. Baal would be defeated by death. He'd go down into the grave during the summer, which led to the drought. And then he would be, again, resurrected in the fall to repeat the cycle. The Canaanite deities represent the worst of the imagination of mankind. Literally all of the sinful, imaginative things that the people would come up with, the deities did. We see this repeated in a number of ancient Near Eastern deities, right? They act as murderers, as adulterers, right? As those who take advantage of and destroy people, having no care or compassion for them. These idols that have been up are figments of a sinful imagination, designed literally to distract us from the holiness of God. To believe in these things requires that we allow sin to lead us into a delusional mindset. Isaiah rails against the idols that the people of Israel sets up. In Isaiah chapter 41, he says, you go out and you cut a tree down in the field. You drag the tree home, you cut the tree in half. Half of it you split up into wood, and you light a fire and you cook your meal on it. The other half of this tree you take and you carve into an image, you stand it up outside in the garden and you worship it as God. Right? These are delusions of sin. An active attempt of sin to draw us away from the truth. God makes it very clear that he has revealed his glory. David writes in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim his handiwork. In Romans, Paul tells us that the invisible attributes of God have been revealed in creation. Not only that, but the people of Israel have the covenants of God, his literal appearances to them, the law that he's given them to reveal himself, his holiness. And yet the people allow sin to lead them away. They are living a delusion. This test isn't a test at all of God's power, because the thing that he's being tested against has absolutely no power at all. But the people agree to this in their delusion. They have given so much power to these idols, these sinful things that they've set up, that they think this is going to be a contest. This is the state that we find ourselves in with sin if we're not careful to root it out, to get rid of it. If we give time and space to the devil, we're told he prowls about like a lion searching to devour. And yet all too rapidly we find ourselves living in the delusion of sin. Thinking that God doesn't have any power here. We find ourselves questioning just like the Israelites did. We wonder what the outcome will be. Right? But the outcome was never in doubt. Don't believe the delusions that sin carries in our lives. They are intended to lead you away from God. So Elijah kind of plays perhaps into the thoughts of the people here and into the thoughts of the prophets of Baal. He says, you guys go first. I'm one guy. I've got a lot of work to do over the course of this day in preparing the altar. You guys prepare your altar, put the bull on it, light the fire. Don't light the fire, but put the wood and the bull there, and then call out to Baal. Right? And so the 450 prophets of Baal immediately go to town, almost as if it's a race, right? Oh, well, we need to prepare this and get it ready quickly and begin calling on Baal because we don't want Elijah to get there first. For any of you who are hunters, if you've ever processed a deer, you know it takes a while. But if there's a crowd of people, that labor is reduced dramatically. And so it says that the prophets of Baal, they go about, they take the bull that was given to them, they prepare it, and they call upon the name of Baal from morning until noon. Typically, the time frame from morning until in Jewish circles, the morning started with the first light of day. I know that doesn't really happen for most of us. We come in a couple of hours after that. But this is from early in the day till noon. They're laboring, calling out to Baal, saying, "Oh, Baal, answer us." Now, there's some things to consider here. With 450 people, there's a few things that the prophets of Baal will not be able to claim. One, that they didn't have enough ideas about how they should call out to Baal. You have 450 different people being creative. Right. Number two, that there weren't enough people to do the work necessary. Right. Number three, that they couldn't be loud enough. Right. All these things are excuses that we sometimes like to use. I didn't sort of use the right formula here to solve this problem. I didn't make enough noise. Right? I didn't have enough people around me to help with the situation. These are all typical worldly excuses. Notice in this section, in verse 26, is kind of the key phrase that helps us understand what's happening. But there was no voice and no one answered. This phrase will actually form what's called an inclusio in the text. So it happens twice. Verse 26, and then if you look down a little further, in verse 29. But there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. An inclusio is a phrase that's repeated at the beginning and end of a section that provides strong emphasis on the action that's taking place there, and also brackets that action so that we know when it's over. This is a ringing indictment against Baal. There's no voice, no one answered. It speaks to the delusion of the people in worshiping this idol. And Elijah plays into this. It says, at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, right? Or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened." When we look at this list, we say, wow, Elijah's using a lot of sarcasm. And wow, he's really prodding them here. But these are all actual beliefs that the people had in Baal. They actually believed that at times in the year, Baal would just contemplate the universe. That he would be so taken up by contemplating the universe that he would not be able to be awakened. He wouldn't pay attention to the people for a while. This was actually what they believed. Like humans, he might even be relieving himself. In fact, the cycle of Baal points to this being part of the yearly cycle of how rain came to pass. That even the seasons were part of this sort of unholy, derogatory cycle of how the gods lived. Perhaps he's on a journey, Again, year by year, the people expected that Baal would go on a journey and then he would be defeated by death. He wouldn't answer for a while. Or that he might be asleep. And that by some outpouring of effort, they might get his attention. That the people would need to plead, would need to make this extraordinary effort simply to gain the attention of the idol. Oftentimes we act in this same way when we look at the modern idols that we look at. We go to extraordinary lengths trying to simply gain the attention of whatever we think has power to change our situation. We spend 120 hours a week in the job because we think for some reason at the end of that road we'll find happiness. Right? We'll drive to other countries looking for doctors who have some new technique that might solve the problem that we're facing. But you'll find no answer there. Right? We're told in Psalm 121:4 that the Lord, who looks over Israel, he neither sleeps nor slumbers. He has not gone on a journey. He is not out of reach. He does not need you to yell so loudly that you scare the birds out of the tree in your neighbor's yard. He is present. He is active. He is paying attention to his people. Jesus tells us frequently in the New Testament, ask when you have need. The Lord will provide. Seek him and you'll find him. Right? Jesus even gives the example that the Lord is even concerned with the sparrows. How much more he'll be concerned with his people. And yet we see that no matter how much of an outpouring of sinful effort these people have, even to the point where they have to cut themselves, shed their own blood to try to simply gain the attention of this deity, which is a figment of their imagination, it does not work. No one answered, no one paid attention. Again, you will not find an answer in idolatry. If you place your trust in these things which draw you away from God, you won't find any satisfying answer there. The only hope we have in salvation, in deliverance, and in provision is with the Lord. He does not share his glory with others. He demands that we give our all to him, all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our strength. When we don't, he often uses trials, like the people of Israel facing this drought, to drive them to the conclusion that there is no power in these idols, and to remind them that the only power that there is God. So midday passes, and they rave on, it says, until the time of the offering of the oblation. This would be in the evening. And during this time, Elijah's been at work. It says first he digs a trench, and then he rebuilds the altar that had been torn down. 12 large stones are placed. If you've ever moved large stones on your own, you know that this is a lot of work. Digging a trench is a lot of work. You can imagine at this time, 2-3 years into the drought, the ground is probably like concrete. Right? Elijah's over there on his own, digging this trench while the 450 prophets of Baal are making this raucous noise next to him. And the people must be sitting and watching, saying, is Elijah even going to finish before the end of the day? And then Elijah has to slaughter the bull and prepare it for the offering. This was not just like toss the whole bull onto the pile of sticks, right? He'd have to cut it up. He was to trim the fat from it, to take the skin off. This is a lengthy process, right? But notice the timing. He's ready at the time of the evening offering, the offering of the oblation. the time when the Israelites should have been making their daily offering to the Lord. Notice the symbolism here. He uses 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel. God is reminding the people of his covenant that he's made with them. They stack up the stones, they pile on the wood. You can see Elijah going around collecting bunches of wood and walking to the altar and tossing a little bit on and tossing a little bit more. You needed a large pile of wood to be able to burn a bull as an offering. And then he prepares the bull, he cuts it in pieces, he lays it on the wood. And then he makes this sort of unbelievable claim in the circumstances. He instructs the people, fill 4 jars with water and pour it over the altar. Now, this is amazing for a number of reasons. One, it's been 3.5 years of drought. He's up on a mountain, so they've got to go literally down into the valley to get the water and then carry it up. It probably wouldn't have been an easy process to find water at this point. And then it's not to satisfy their thirst, for which they are probably desperate at this point. But Elijah says, pour it over the water. You can almost feel the anger of the people of Israel as they carry these jars up and they pour it on the offering. And they say, man, Elijah, if this doesn't work, you have one coming for you. This water, which is so precious, which has been so scarce, we're now pouring out on this altar. Notice he instructs them to do it 3 times, 12 jars of water, one for each of the tribes of Israel. This also serves perhaps as a defense of the integrity of the test, right? So in a drought, the wood is really dry, right? You can imagine even a small spark might light this pile ablaze. And so as they pour the water onto the altar, Elijah is making sure that he can't be accused of any trickery. There's no doubt about it. The wood is now soaked. It says the water flows over the altar and fills the trench even around it. Elijah is making sure that people know that this is not his effort. God alone is going to do the miraculous work of revealing himself. And then we see Elijah's prayer. At the time of the offering, Elijah the prophet came near and he says, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. These are the 3 forefathers of the nation to which the covenants had been made. Elijah is pointing the people back to God's faithfulness in history. He is the God who appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and Israel. He is the one who sent them down to Egypt. He is the one who brought them up out of Egypt with a mighty hand. He is the one who brought them into the land of Canaan, who defeated giants, who drove out peoples greater than them. Elijah is reminding them of God's faithfulness in light of their unfaithfulness. Let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all of these things at your command. So in Sunday school with the little kids, this is a point where we typically tell them, don't go home and try to build an altar and pray that God would light it on fire. Elijah's doing this at the command of God. He's showing up at the time that God has appointed. He's showing up. He's making this offering as God has instructed with the express purpose of leading the people of Israel back from their idol worship, returning them to him. Elijah is demonstrating the humility of trusting in God throughout this trial. Oftentimes when we read the story, it's only 2 chapters and we tend to think of it as a short time. But this has been 3.5 years. Some portion of this time, Elijah lived by a brook. He lived in the wilderness, away from his home, away from his family. At the brook, he would drink the water out of the stream, and ravens, it says, brought meat and bread to him there. I'd be willing to wager that not many of you would consider being fed by the birds a fun time. Then he's instructed to leave the brook Cherith and to go to a foreign land, to Sidon, to the very homeland of his enemy, Jezebel. He's from Sidon. He goes there and he lives with a widow, one of the poorest people in the nation. No husband to lay claim to the land. She has a young son. It says when he arrives there, she has literally a handful of flour and a small jar of oil left. And she says, I'm preparing this little bit of food that my son and I may eat and die. And yet God takes that handful of flour and that small jar of oil, and he makes that enough food to last the widow, her household, and Elijah all through this drought. And through this, Elijah has remained faithful. Elijah's trusted in God. Then he's instructed, go, return to Israel. He goes there into the land where the king and the queen are trying to kill him, where leaders in the army are likely willing to gain favor by killing him before their king Ahab. He shows up on this hill with a bunch of people who don't even want to lay claim to belief in God. He's standing next to 450 prophets of a rival deity, and he stands here and he says, I've done this. I've persisted in this because you told me to. Oh, that we too would persist in trials like Elijah did here. That we would stand firm in our faith. Verse 37, answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, have turned their hearts back. This is work that only God can do, to change the hearts of people from sin back to him. So Elijah makes this prayer, and one word then gives us the transition. Then the fire of the Lord fell from heaven. After the whole day of the prophets of Baal pleading, crying out, making a horrendous noise and racket, cutting themselves, spilling their own blood, dancing around, limping around the altar. After the whole day, Elijah makes this simple prayer, and then fire falls from heaven. And look at what the fire does. It consumes the burnt offering. Okay. It consumes the wood, sure. And the stones. Have you ever seen fire burn stones? That doesn't happen. Fire doesn't just consume stones. It might crack them, but it doesn't burn them up. It says they're consumed. They're gone. It says the dust even is gone. Not only that, but the water that was in the trench, the fire licks up and takes away. Where there was an altar now, there is simply a patch of bare ground, gone. God has consumed it. You can imagine standing in the crowd with Israel around Mount Carmel, looking up, and you see the fire come down and light this pile of the sacrifice aflame. And we probably would have a similar reaction to the people here. They fell on their face. They said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Previously, we see the characteristic of the followers of Baal listed as there was no voice, no one answered. And then Elijah, God's faithful servant, prays and is immediately answered. And we're left to ask, why in the world do we attribute power to these other things? Why? There's no voice there. There's no answer. Why? Why don't we turn to God immediately, continuously? You might be going through trials today, and you might be trying desperately to find a solution. You might have looked literally every corner of the world over for that solution. But the answer is here. God is waiting for you to turn to him. Again, he's the only one who will answer. As we conclude here, we see that Elijah gives this command: seize the prophets of Baal, let none of them escape. It says they take them and they bring them down to the brook Kishon and they slaughter them there. This is according to the law of the Lord, Deuteronomy 7, 2 through 6, 13, and 17. Give instructions for what the people are to do if false prophets arise and try to lead the people astray to other gods. It says they're to be put to death. Right? And when we look at this, we say, wow, that seems really harsh from a human perspective. But we need to understand the consequences here, because the consequences are the same for people being led away from God today. The consequences are eternal. Walking away from God does not lead to simply a few moments of your life that are uncomfortable. Walking away from God carries with it the eternal consequences of death, eternal death. The people of Israel were given such clear, precise, and devastating instructions to rid themselves of sin because it would lead to death. They were not told to make friends with sin, to tolerate it for a little while. They were told to get rid of it. We too need to be careful that we don't let idols into our lives. We don't perpetuate these, as the house of Jeroboam and the house of Ahab did. We need to be careful that we don't perpetuate the delusional beliefs of sin. How do we do that? We rely on God's word. He's given us his word as a guide. Has he not, through history, given us more than enough evidence to believe in him? Right. Has he not demonstrated his faithfulness over and over and over again, ultimately leading to his arrival on earth in Jesus, to his death on the cross for us? If God has truly demonstrated his faithfulness to that level, does he not deserve everything? And so what are we to do? We're to turn to God, recognizing that he stands ready to meet our need according to his purposes, that he's the only source of salvation, that our proper worship is wholehearted worship. And we're encouraged that when we offer our prayers to God, we don't need to scream them. We don't need to do ludicrous acts of worship to try to just gain his attention, but he hears us. By the blood of Jesus, we're told we can bring our petitions even into the throne room of heaven to offer them there to God. And so as we live life, as we face trials, watch out for idols. Watch out for things that you've given power to that power truly belongs with God. Pray often. Turn to God often as you need help. Don't believe the lie that asking for help from God is a sign of weakness. Turn to him, seek him. He listens. The story concludes by Elijah going up onto the mountain and praying, and God sends rain. He gives a second sign of his faithfulness to Israel after their hearts turn to him. Elijah goes up, he prays, and says a small cloud rises up out of the sea. It comes over the land, and it drenches it. If you find yourselves facing trial and things seem difficult, remember that those trials oftentimes are a warning to us that we need to turn around, right? That we need to turn from sinful practices and return to the Lord. And he's faithful and ready to receive us when we repent. So it's 8 o'clock. We're right on schedule, which is good. Didn't go too long. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Yeah, Rick.
I know you were versed on that Old Testament. Was there a specific size? I'm just curious. Was there a specific size for that altar that was made or built?
So it's 12 stones. These seem to be within Elijah's capability of lifting them, right? So it would be relatively small, right? Not huge. Yeah. Other question? Yeah, Harrison.
So I know one of the aspects of Baal was that you could lie and get away with it as long as you didn't get caught.
Sure.
And that was part of like one of the beliefs behind one of the Baals, and I don't know which one this is necessarily, but I guess my question is, with 450 priests and the people seemingly at the base of the mountain, why did they not just cheat? I mean, the only one to hold them accountable would have been the opponent,
Right.
who would have been like, you cheated, and then they would say we didn't. It just doesn't add up to me. I feel like they were just not going by what they believed.
Right. So why didn't they cheat? This speaks to us about the delusion of sin, how rampant it is.
Yeah.
Right? That sin really sets in the heart and convinces us. We believe sin. We give so much power to sin that we believe the lie. Not just a little bit, but we really sell out in the lie. Right? This is the warning against sin and why we need to be so careful to measure our lives against God's word, to be careful, to pay attention. Are we obeying? Right? This is also why, as a church community, we're told to watch one another's back. We often think of things like church discipline as these horrible things. But often sin has the power to lead us into these delusions where we might not even recognize it. And the grace of going and leading somebody back from that sin, returning them to faith, it can be a wonderful thing, and it's something we should be doing as the church community. Right? Oftentimes we pretend like sin doesn't really have any influence, like somehow we are completely immune to it, right? But we find that oftentimes that feeling precedes the greatest falls in people's lives. Other questions?
Why were the stones burned? What would you imagine that to show besides God's greatness?
Sure.
Seems unusual.
Yeah, well, it completely removes any source of doubt that Elijah had lit the fire. Right? It's completely unnatural in scope. There's no other explanation left for the people of Israel but that this was God acting. Right? Because this is another lie that sin likes to perpetuate. Right? Oh, there's some other explanation for that. It doesn't have to be God. Right? That's a common one we see. Other questions?
I was just
Yeah.
commenting that it would be pretty dramatic afterwards. Usually after a fire, there's something left. Like
Sure.
there's nothing there. So
Yeah.
it would be pretty dramatic.
Yeah. And remember, the people are standing around, so they can see this up on the mountain, right? You can see a pile of stones just gone, right? We can imagine the amazement that the people would have had. Other comments, questions, things that you learned? So we need to ask ourselves, are we kind of perpetuating the worship of idols in our lives? Right? And by the way, idols typically follow a family progression like it did with Ahab. Right? This wasn't necessarily Ahab's idea. Oh, let me go grab the Baals and worship them. That was perpetuated by his family before him. Right? So we can take warning from this. Oftentimes, even specific sins can be perpetuated in the circles that we run in or by our families. All right, closing comments. Yeah.
I guess I'd say I just appreciate what you said about taking something that was precious to them, like the water. Thinking about how they took that precious sacrifice and they sacrificed. It's like a sacrifice within the sacrifice.
Sure.
Right? But like, I never thought of it that way of like taking how precious that water was to them in that moment, and it caused them to act, for him to act in faith.
Mm-hmm.
Elijah definitely acted in faith.
Yeah.
To give up that precious resource
This is a pattern that we see throughout the Bible. God requires that we give up the worldly things that we hold on to as precious, and we turn those in. We might call it for faith equity, right? Jesus says this in his Sermon on the Mount: "Don't lay up treasures on earth, where things can be broken in and stolen, or where rust will destroy. Lay up treasures in heaven." Right? And so again, we see with the pouring out of that water, sort of the last vestige of, all right, we're giving up what was precious to us that we desperately think we need even to survive. And Elijah's saying, you can trust in God that he's going to provide for this need. All right, any final comments? Going once, going twice? All right, let's wrap up with a word of prayer as we close this evening.